Raise coffee. Okay, we're about ready to get started. And I'm going to introduce Ray's son, who's with history, and he has a lot of history behind him and hopefully in front of him. And he's done a lot of projects over the years that I know of, and has become an expert in the Holocaust history, and was featured just very recently in Carla the Rescue documentary. At any rate, in this case, he's going to be talking to us about the Fallen Cougars project. He was awarded the WSU Library of Honor for that. I think people have seen that. I sent that out on the email notice, and we've invited him here today to talk about that. I'm also going to be passing around my little pad here. The provost needs to record who's attended and who's had coffee and donuts and that sort of stuff. So we need to keep track of that every so often. So if you could put your name down on the pad as it
is this part of immigration information?
Boy, you're on top of it, Nick. I can't believe it. I'm not going to answer that question. But anyway, yeah, good for you. So at any rate, I think, Ray, you're all set up.
There you go.
And hopefully in a couple of years when you retire, you'll join our group. We hope to see you.
Thank you.
Anyway, you'll get an invite from me. And go ahead, Alex, and go ahead, Ray.
Okay. Well, real pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for taking the time. I know all the retirees I know get busier after they retire from their day job. So thanks for being interested. So I'll give you the backstory on the Fallen Cougars project in a moment, but a very, very simple test. So what is this image that I chose for my cover? Where is this on campus?
My Thompson Memorial.
It's, yeah, that's right. It's the WSU Veterans Memorial.
Right by Thompson Hall.
By Thompson Hall. That's right. This picture was taken a couple of years ago. I believe it would have been a Veterans Day commemoration. They usually put up a wreath and some flowers. And our story, in a sense, is grounded there and begins and kind of ends there as well. And I hope that I'll be able to circle the circle within the hour here. Let's see. All right. First challenge, how do I advance this screen? Sorry, guys, you knocked out. Okay. There we go. Okay. So since some of you know me, but some of you don't, I assume. So you know, one of the first things I think I need to do with the new audience is to establish a shred of credibility, right? So so who am I anyhow, right? I go by Ray. So Ray, why should you spend an hour of your life listening to me? So I was born within 4 blocks of the Penn State University campus. So I grew up very familiar with land-grant institutions. WSU is a second home in that sense. Is just a little bit smaller than Penn State, but you know, the whole environment is familiar. And so I wouldn't say I was predestined to become a historian, because historians believe in choice, right? But my father was an engineering professor at Penn State, and my mother was an historian, and my brother followed my father, and I followed my mother. So here I am as a member of the history department at WSU. But first, I went to Swarthmore College, which is a liberal arts college outside of Philadelphia. This pertains to Fallen Cougars in the sense that Swarthmore, of course, is a Quaker college. Quakers are pacifists. So I I should back up. So I grew up in I was born in 1960. So I grew up in the 60s and 70s. World War II was quite present in the popular culture then. I was building model airplanes and model tanks, and there were movies and everything like that. And then I went to this Quaker college, and I was convinced that war is bad. And so, I was saying, study war no more and all of that. I think fortunately, I took a political science course on American foreign policy where I actually learned you could study war without necessarily endorsing every war that comes along. So I have roots in having grown up where World War II was all pervasive. Our teachers and principals were veterans and so on. And so I went through a little phase there of anti-warism, and now I hope I have a critically developed approach towards it. I got my PhD at the Johns Hopkins University, and I studied modern German history. I did not study World War II, and I did not study the collective memory of war in the United States. I studied modern German history. But when I came to WSU in the fall of 1991, they hired me as a modern German historian, and the first class they asked me to teach was the history of Nazi Germany, which ironically I had not studied in detail in graduate school. But as you all know, as faculty, retired faculty and staff, you learn by doing, right? So I started to teach about Nazi Germany, and it's an eternally popular course. And so the department offered it frequently, and the more I taught it, the more I understood it and the more interested I got, which took me into part of what Larry mentioned here, which is Holocaust and genocide studies. So I've taught quite a bit about Nazism. I've developed my own course, a separate course on the history of the Holocaust, and another course on comparative genocide. I also maintain my interest in war, but being able to teach it now from a critical, respectful and critical perspective. So I teach the history of the world wars at WSU. So both World War I and World War II. And I have developed a great interest in collective memory, which is how do societies make sense of their past. And I especially focus on how do societies make sense of usually traumatic events. Okay, so war, genocide, natural disasters, and things like that. So that is the setup. You can see where this is going. That's the setup for Fallen Cougars. A little bit about myself. I don't just do history, right? I'm too old for that. So I don't stay up till 12 reading a history book anymore. So we have lots of dogs, cats, ducks, and chickens. We live out in Albion. I'd like to work out. I'm going to the rec center after this. In fact, I think I see you there
almost every day.
Yes. And I do Tai Chi to try and keep my balance and clarity. I follow the Mariners, I follow the Seahawks, I follow the Cougs, and I will like a good craft beer once in a while, just to that's me. This picture was from last year's birthday. I like to run around campus. So, have you seen this picture before in the audience? Who has seen this picture before? Nick, okay, so two of you. Yeah, there's a famous series by the same photographer. He took a number of pictures around Pennsylvania Station. This is the midpoint of the war, April of 1943. I like this picture very much. The soldier, I assume, is going off somewhere. We don't know, maybe just to another camp. Maybe he's going overseas. We don't know. But I think what captures this for me. Well, actually, I should shut up before I tell you why I like this picture. What do you see in the picture? If you respond to the picture, and if you don't, that's fine. If you respond to the picture, what do you see, and what might it say about World War II to you, just from your own memory and understanding?
consensus of everybody's going to do their part. And
In
some
the soldier
serve,
going
some
on?
are home,
Oh, okay.
supporting service people. You know, it's a kind of coming together of the country.
Yeah.
You can see pictures like that in the Ukraine all the time.
Yeah.
Now,
You know, what struck me about this was, I'm not sure how to say this, the lack of passion between the two. Here's a person who may be going overseas, possibly to die, and it's like, I'll give you a kiss, rather than a full embrace.
I think she does have his arms kind of around his waist. If you don't say so.
And he's got her arm grasping his arm.
I see what I see in a lot of these pictures before of soldiers before they go to war. They're all dressed and they're natty, and I've been a soldier myself.
Okay.
And your shoes are signed and everything like that. And this is before they find out what war is really like.
yeah.
And then all of a sudden things change.
Mhm.
I see in the background, the two women in the background with different looks of concern on their faces. And I imagine this sort of is an image that foresees the lack of men in society in America during World War II.
I like that the two kissing are oblivious to everyone else around them.
Yeah. Yeah, these are all great responses. You know, the focus here is on the couple that is kissing, but the women behind the woman in the foreground on our right. I mean, she's holding what might be a handkerchief up to her face, look of concern. There's a number of other women standing around. I assume that there might be other guys leaving. So this is a moment in their lives that's captured. I don't know what happened to either of them, and I don't know what happened to that relationship. Right? We don't know. I really hope he came back. If he went overseas, maybe he stayed stateside the whole time. I really hope he came back healthy in mind and body, but we don't know. We don't know what happened to her, but they had this moment. And this is one of the things that I try and do as a historian is to capture very human moments, right? This is what makes history interesting and alive to me. And I think that to whatever power you might feel in this picture, that's what these pictures do. So, the World War II generation, sometimes called the greatest generation. So it's 80 years. This year is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. I'm sure you are all quite aware of that. 80 is the round, we mark round anniversaries. This is certainly the last round anniversary where we're going to have any significant number of World War II veterans with us. Even by the 85th, it's going to be an infinitesimal number. You can see the numbers here. Of the 16.5 million who served during World War II, we have less than 50,000 alive, and they're dying at the rate of over 1,000 a day. So we're going to be now. The numbers are changing as there's a smaller base there, but still there's less than 0.5% left. So we are on the very edge of losing living memory of the Second World War, whether from the soldiers or from the families or their loved ones. And so that's the context in which I'm launching Fallen Cougars. And so the question, one of the deeper questions, which in preparing for this presentation, helped me to think a little bit further about this. What this project is really trying to do is to help us do the impossible, which is to cross time and space to reconnect on a human level with those of that generation. Okay, and hopefully in the next 40 minutes, you'll see our attempt to do so. But by the way, I think in the past year especially, I've become aware that this is not just an intellectual exercise for me or some hobby for me. So my mother passed in 2021. And so I've been thinking about my connection, my family connection. So none of my family, none of them served in World War II or whatever. So for a long time, I actually thought, okay, it's different. But then I realized that both my parents came to the United States before the US entered the war. Both of them came as students. They would have been part of a very small number of Chinese or Asians allowed into the country, given the immigration restrictions at the time. They were able to come in as students. This is a handful at that time. My father came a few years before my mother. My mother crossed the Pacific literally in July of 1941. On USS Calvin Coolidge, which is a passenger liner in the presidential line. I think it might have been the last passenger trip she took. I have to double down on my facts there, but she became a troop ship and hit a mine and sank in the South Pacific in 42. But I'm just glad my mother made the ship on time, because I wouldn't, you guys would be listening to someone else if that weren't the case.
Wow.
So here they are. And, I want to just tip my hat to them and acknowledge the role that they play in this project too, because I've realized that this is actually a much more personal project than I thought it was when I began it in 2017. This is both of them as graduate students. She was at Radcliffe, he was at MIT, sometime in the late 1940s. Okay, so on to the origin story. How did we get here? So in 2017, I'd been teaching about the Second World War for a number of years. And as a dutiful faculty member, and I just stopped being chair, which meant I felt I had a great deal of freedom. I was free. And so I was looking for professional development opportunities, and there's an organization called the Friends of World War II Memorial that supports public education both at the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C., and they sponsor World War II focused education around the country. And so every summer, they have a conference for World War II educators. The vast majority are secondary school teachers, but there's a few college faculty, including the guy on your far right there with the big arrow. There I was standing on the edge. We were at the FDR Memorial on a very hot July day in DC. Going to DC in July is a whole different story, but we survived. But it's a wonderful experience, great speakers, they pay for everything, which was wonderful. They have a big ask though. And so the big ask in return for their generosity is they wanted all the educators to go back and do what they call the community service project. Do something related to World War II education or honoring veterans in your community. It could be anything. What was I going to do? What was I going to do with Washington State? Fortunately, from previous work, I knew that in our library, we have the manuscripts, archives, and special collections. We call it MASC. And in the library are war records. And the war records contain material from both world wars, files about at the time, Washington State College, right. So WSC, students and faculty who served and died in both world wars. A little bit more about that in a moment, but I knew that they were there. And, I thought this is something which I could do. I could work with those records and create something out of them of lasting value. So the vision was to complete a project that a former president, E.O. Holland, who is president in the last years, he was president for decades before and then came back and served in the last years of the war. His vision had been to create a memorial book to give to the families of the war dead at the end of the war. And he got as far as having corresponded with them, and they sent in pictures, and we have letters from many of the families which provide details. But as these things happen, he retired and died shortly thereafter, and another president came in, and I assume the college was busy dealing with the boom with GI enrollment and so on, and the project somehow got forgotten, as these things do get forgotten. But the records were still there in Mask. And so through our great librarians and archivists there, I thought I can do something with those records. So that's the basis for Fallen
Just a
Cougars.
question.
Yeah.
Did you say President Holland left and then came back?
Yeah, he'd been a president, and I don't have the years off the top of my head, but he was in the war. He was sort of came out of retirement, I believe, to serve again for a couple of years in the war. But he had been president, I believe, in World War I or shortly thereafter.
Wow.
So he'd been a very long.
That's totally new to me.
Wow.
You can fact check me on this and get the years, but he was an institution in himself.
Yes.
For hence Holland Library, right?
Yeah.
So anyhow, that was our secret weapon. We had these records here. So now, of course, well before Fallen Cougars, there still is a war memorial that honors the war dead, and all of you certainly have seen this. These are the plaques, the brass plaques. It's a very traditional way of honoring dead of any event. You put their names on the plaque. This picture was taken in 2017. And the total number of our war dead, WSU war dead, is about 250. And they were engraved on plaques, and you all know where the memorial is. It's on that nice quiet sector in the old part of campus. It's between Bryan Hall and Thompson Hall, and there's a walkway nearby. And it's a quiet, secluded, and respectful place to contemplate, which is great. The problem is that it's so quiet and secluded that it doesn't generate a lot of foot traffic, which I suppose is both a blessing but also a problem, because very few people. There's always traffic going by, but they don't take 20 steps over to go to the memorial. I think for most students, it's just something that's there. And faculty are always going to meetings. And so few people come, and those who may stop and look, unless they're direct family members, which would be very, very few, no one knows who these people are anymore. As in, like, you'd walk into a Zoom meeting, a random Zoom meeting, and not know any of 50 faces on the wall. It'd be very meaningless to you, actually, right? And when I say that they don't know them, I mean that they literally don't know who are these people. And so they may say, in a general sense, I respect what you did, but it kind of stops there. And so I saw this as a problem that we could offer a solution to. And the solution, which Fallen Cougars tries to provide, is to create a digital memorial, which is a nice way of saying a website, but a digital memorial which can be accessed, right? We're in the digital age. They can access it from their laptops, their tablets, or their phones 24/7. But it would be much more than just a list of names. And so what we have tried to create is a website with photos and life stories, short life stories. And for me, the goal is to humanize the names, to put humanity back into them, like the picture that we saw from Penn Station a few minutes ago. Whether or not, whatever your response, at least you saw these people as living humans, and we all could relate with the emotions that were probably being shown there. So to humanize the names, make them meaningful, and make them accessible to an audience that lives on digital technology. We hope that by doing so, we can reintegrate the fallen into the Cougar Nation, to take a little Coug speak here, right? But the idea of, well, after all, once a Coug, always a Coug. I don't think they had that slogan in 1942, but we're applying it across time and space. And so I'm going to show a short little, a 4-minute video that I hope encapsulates better than I can say what the project is trying to do. WSU does have a physical veterans memorial, but it's in a very quiet part of campus. When I ask my students or my colleagues, hardly anyone has ever been there. So that's the great thing about the digital project that we're doing with Fallen Cougars, is that we're going to provide the life stories of each one of these war dead, to build a live connection between the present Washington State community and the servicemen who enlisted from Washington State College in the 1940s and fought and died in the Second World War. We want to honor them and respect their legacy and make their lives present again in the 21st century. So when the students start working on Fallen Cougars, we give them a list of names to choose from, and usually they find a soldier or an airman or a sailor that speaks to them.
One of the stories I can tell you is Cecil Welchco. He was a star running back here and was deployed to the Philippines. And they were just attacked immediately. They had no idea the attack was coming. Even though it wasn't part of his job, he jumped on with the infantry and helped everybody escape to the fortress on the backside of the island. When I talk about sacrifice and dedication, I mean, how many people really have that in them?
I think what surprised me was that all of these guys very willingly gave up everything. They didn't even graduate. A lot of them left wives. A lot of them even left kids behind. But for them, it always just seemed that duty was the most important thing.
There are moments of tedium, but moments of discovery that bring absolute joy, both professionally and personally. There are times where I finish a biography and I'm overwhelmed with emotion, but with pride as well.
When the students make the discoveries and when they tell me about it, that is what I actually work for as an educator.
I really like that we get to look at the lives of these guys that gave their lives, and it kind of brings it back and brings us closer together.
There's always a surprise, and that's the nature of research.
The enthusiasm of the students who do it has really been the driving force behind this, because for them, for many of them, it's the first time that they've done this sort of research. And now it's live. It's so good to see everyone here. It's a day which we were pointing towards for 4 years.
I think this project really shows the power of historical research and the ability to uncover stories and facts and details that were otherwise hidden or forgotten.
If you changed the fashions and taught them what a cell phone was, I am convinced that the Fallen Cougars would identify with present-day Washington State University students, and they'd be recognizable by our students today. And that is the whole purpose of this project. That's one of the intangibles, which I hadn't realized would happen at the start, the sense of relationship that the students feel. So they're not just doing it so that people can learn about it. The students actually make a friend, in a sense.
If I could talk to my soldiers today, the first thing that I would say to them is thank you. But I would also say, I admire you, I respect you. I have the privilege of getting to know you through what you've left behind, and that makes me a better historian as well as a person.
And
well done.
wow. Well, that was great work done by a private videographer who I know up in Spokane. If any of you have a job, I'd be happy to pass on her name. But I should give props also to the many different units here that have supported Fallen Cougars. And in the past year, we also got a lot of support from upper administration to help push us across the finish line. So this takes a lot of support to make it happen. Let's see. Oh, no. How do I get back into my? There we go. Okay. So this is a picture of some of our undergraduate researchers. So this began in, the research began in the fall of 2017, and it's gone on through just this past summer. And we have just a very small handful of cases that we'll still need to do. But the undergraduates didn't get paid for it. They could exchange work in the project for an exam, which is, but some of them jumped. It is really interesting. Most of the classes still preferred to take the exams. I think it's because it's what they knew what to do. But there was always a small number of students who were willing to try something new, which is actually to do real research. So this is the 2017 cohort from the World War II class. We had a small number, usually about 3 graduate research a summer, which isn't a lot, to work on the files. This past 2 years ago, we made the big surge. We doubled that number of researchers, and then we've come very close. They work with the war records, which are in those boxes that you see there, and we work with Ancestry.com, which unlocks the keys to the kingdom in terms of all the great resources that you can find. I've given the number of over 90%, 95% of cases that are done. I would say it's probably close to 98 or 99% at this point, but I want to stay conservative for public relations reasons here. So we're really very close to the end. And so what we do is so this is, and this is another perspective on the memorial. We have a formula, or a format, I should say. So we have about 250 short life stories. And so we want to cover their early life. Where did they grow up? Who were their parents? What did their parents do? We have farm kids. We have kids who came from affluence. We have everything in between to give, because it helps shape who they are and their interests and their identity. Their early life, what did they study and what did they do at Washington State College? And as you would expect, we have the full range from star athletes to Greek members to people in music, people in theater, to those who were had a very, very quiet presence on campus. All right, so the typical makeup, if we want to get a sense of what were their activities and their interests. What was their wartime service? In which branch did they serve? And where and how and when did they die? Because this is about death. All right. And then what legacies did they leave? Have they been remembered? Were they forgotten? So we have a uniform format for all of these stories. And I think I'll share a few of these with you. Actually, let me get back out of this again. I want to show you briefly what the website looks like here. So let's see if I can find where those slides went. Okay, I can't, and I'll keep this going. So let me just get back onto this.
Each of those is on that website?
Each of them is on that website, yeah. So I want to show you a little bit of the range of the cases we had. And the first one would be what we would call, he would have been a huge presence on campus during this time. Archie Merrill Buckley, class of 1930. I think if you can think of any star athletes from WSU in the recent past, I'm thinking of Klay Thompson, the basketball player, something on that level. They called him Little Archie Buckley. He was 5'8", which is just an inch taller than me. So that's pretty small. But Little Archie Buckley, I call him the big man on campus. So he was a 3-sport athlete. So it was football, basketball, and baseball. He won 9 athletic letters. He won the most inspirational athlete award, the Bowler Award. He was president of his class. He was on the athletic council. He was a fraternity man. I mean, you can just imagine, the presence that he brought. He would have been very well known and long remembered. He graduated in 1930. He went on to coach at North Central High School in Spokane, which I checked. It is still up and running. Okay, so it is. And so during the war, he joined the Navy. And at first, he was doing physical fitness training, as you would imagine, for Navy aviators. But then they asked him to actually serve. And so he went on board an aircraft carrier. And he was on USS Saratoga, which is, if you're a World War II history fan, of Saratoga. It was one of our carriers from before Pearl Harbor, and it survived throughout the entire war. On the assault in Iwo Jima, and there's a typo, it's Iwo Jima. Saratoga was providing air cover, and the Japanese attacked Saratoga, but for various reasons, it was left with very little escort at that moment on that day, February 21st. This is the first days of the battle for Iwo Jima, and the Japanese attacked Saratoga with a combination of bombs and kamikaze aircraft that flew into Saratoga, and it is heavily damaged, and there is much loss of life. And here is an image from Saratoga to give you a sense. This was taken shortly after the Japanese had attacked. This ship survived and went back for repairs, but you can see the carnage on the flight deck. And apparently, Archie Buckley was on the flight deck. And from a letter that we have, which is on the website, I think his mother wrote to President Hahn, and his mother said that an officer had written to her saying that Buckley might have saved himself, but there was a pilot literally in an airplane on the flight deck, and Buckley stopped to say, "Hey, get out of your airplane, we're under attack," and that cost him however many seconds, and he was killed. And if you go to the WSU Hall of Fame, you will find his name there. So that's one example. So a very famous at the time person. I doubt that many students know who Archie Buckley is now, but at the time, and his legacy is reverberate for decades, I would say. In contrast, also in the Pacific, so we had Archie Buckley, who was there the full 4 years at WSC, and was the star athlete. Charles Noble Kirkham from Yakima. He's Canadian. He graduated high school from Yakima. He attended for 1 year, and many of our fallen Cougars only attended for 1 year because then they either enlisted or they were drafted. So he attended in 41, 42. I think he did enlist, and many of those who left WSC in 42 enlisted because it was immediately after Pearl Harbor. He became a naval aviator. He was stationed on the USS Shangri-La. You see the carrier there at the bottom picture. That's from 1946. It's after the war, same ship. So in June of 1945, this is the last months of the war. At this point, Iwo Jima had been taken. The Battle of Okinawa was in its very last stages. The Americans were preparing to invade Japan. The southernmost island of the Japanese home islands is called Kyushu, and they were launching lots of airstrikes to try and soften up Japanese defenses, and the Japanese were defending ferociously. And so on June 2nd, Shangri-La launched its planes for an airstrike on Kyushu. They took heavy losses, Kirkham's wingman's airplane was damaged. They couldn't get back to the aircraft carrier. So the wingman had to ditch, had to go into the sea. Kirkham stayed with his wingman. He was radioing the position to the ship, and he was staying to provide cover. But these aircraft did not have lots of fuel, and he ran out of fuel himself too. He must have known at some point, watching the gauge, he must have known I either have to get out now or I'm going to go down. He chose to stay. And the last words that he radioed down are, "I'm going down to join up." So he chose to go down and join his wingman rather than save himself. It turns out that on June 2nd, this was the day before a typhoon went through the area. And so the seas were really bad, and they couldn't get rescue aircraft out there. And the records I saw didn't say for how long. I'm assuming it may have been days until they could get rescue planes to the last reported area. And of course, by that point, there was no trace of anybody or anything. So Kirkham disappeared. He posthumously received the Navy Cross, which is the second highest military decoration you can get in the U.S. military, just below the Medal of Honor. So I wanted to pair up Buckley and Kirkham to show that here's a really famous guy, a well-known coup, versus Kirkham. I doubt many people knew him. He wasn't here long, and he was a good engineer. He would have been studying all the time anyhow. But both of them, in their own way, acted very heroically and chose to risk themselves and gave their own lives. The third of four cases I want to share with you is a very regional one from La Crosse. And I'm sure all of you have seen the signs for the cross as you're heading out that stretch of 26 and the long trek out to the west side. I don't know how many of you have ever turned off to actually go to La Crosse. You have? Okay. I think I've been there once. Yeah. Am I correct? It's still very, very small. Yes. Yeah.
It's one place to have lunch. That's it.
That's it.
Yeah, I heard good things about the cafe, but it might have closed.
The cafe closed, but you go to the grocery store. I did this just a few months ago.
Okay.
Because I follow the railroads. You go to the grocery store, and then there's a community center right by with tables where you could sit.
Right. I heard about that.
That's what's left.
That's what's left, right?
That's right.
Oh.
So Noah Elwin Alvin, from a very small Eastern Washington farm town. All right, you can imagine. That picture on the left, he was a star athlete at La Crosse High School for the La Crosse Tigers. There's this big L letter, and I think he won Outstanding Athlete trophy. He went to WSU also in 41-42, so the same year as Kirkham, who we just saw. He also quit college. He enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Force, and he was put on a crew of a B-17, one of the heavy bombers. And so he began his tour of duty in June of 1944, which I think most of you know is, the Normandy invasion, D-Day. And so he flew 17 missions over Normandy and northern France. That was already surviving quite a long time for a bomber crew. On September 25th, he was sent over into action over Germany on this airplane, on this bomber that you see on the right there, the Spirit of 96, they called it. The plane was hit by flak, and in the archives, we have pictures that another plane took of the plane actually going down, straight down, vertically. 4 crew were able to parachute out and survive. They became prisoners. Plowman was not one of them, fortunately. His body was recovered by the Germans, buried, and later repatriated after the war, and is buried to this right now in a small cemetery in La Crosse.
In La Crosse.
Yeah. I chose to share his story because recently Northwest Public Broadcasting did a story for the 80th anniversary of the end of the war. And well, let me back up. So a few years ago, the Plowman family saw a short story about him in WSU magazine, the alumni magazine, and the family, the Plowman's younger sister still is alive today. All right, she's like 95 or 96.
Wow.
Her daughter, so Plowman's great niece, if I have that correct, contacted me because Plowman's sister made a tradition of every Memorial Day going to La Crosse to lay flowers, but at this point she was so, for health reasons, she couldn't make the trip and she was very sad, but they just read the story in WC Magazine and could I supply any further information? I was really fortunate to be able to say, I happen to have a report on Plowman. I'm sharing this to show you that this project can actually has reached people. It is researched by a student named Plowman. I think she was interested to see, is this a relative? It turned out not to be, but we were able to share that story, and I know it was really meaningful to them. So when NWPB wanted to do a story on veterans and families for the 80th anniversary, I knew that the Plowman family had reached out, and the story, which you can find on the NWPB archives. If you're interested, I can tell you who the reporter is my daughter, okay, Rachel's son. You can look her up. She told the Plowman's daughter told a very transparent story of what it means. If you take the statistics of the dead, what it means to a family when they get word of losing a son. The parents were very traumatized by this, and there's a lot of family trauma and bad stuff going on for a while. And his sister was just a young teenager at the time, and of course found it very difficult to cope with this. And so this is sort of intergenerational memories and trauma that carries down for decades afterwards. I hope that the report that we were able to supply gave a little bit more sense of closure, because she saw the downside of this news. So we tend to aestheticize and romanticize and glamorize the dead. You know, they eat the final sacrifice, and, you know, everything and all this, but the real personal costs of this can be really traumatic within families. Okay, and so the Plowman example I think it has both that dark side, or that critical side to this, and that not all deaths are good deaths, at least for the family, but there is a tiny bit of the silver lining here, I think, and that, you know, I think it did in fact mean a lot to the family that someone cared 80 years later, and we have a report. And, you know, it's on the website. It matters. It matters to at least some families. And the last quick example that I'll give, I want is Tol Seiki. His name is Toru, Toru, but when they were registering his name, the clerk couldn't understand his father, who was Japanese and spoke with an accent, so he went down as Toll. So Toru became Tol, for the record. And I want to raise him because he's the only Nisei, the only Japanese American we have in our 250 fallen Cougars. And his case raises important but uncomfortable questions about the American World War II experience, because, as I'm sure you all know, well, first let me back up. So I chose this picture. The family clearly went to a studio. They wanted a picture of themselves, and they chose to portray themselves as being very, very westernized here, right? They're wearing
no Japanese clothing.
No Japanese clothing. This is all American clothing, suit and tie, jacket and tie, and all of this. Toru Tol is the one with the arrow here, standing on the right there. Okay, so these are the two older brothers. That's his older brother, Ben. The family was incarcerated in 1942. So Roosevelt puts forth Executive Order 9066 in February This was in the immediate wake of Pearl Harbor. There was massive racialized anti-Japanese hysteria throughout the country, especially on the West Coast, because the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. They're coming for California next, and the Japanese, you can't trust them. This builds on the history of anti-Asian sentiment within this country, which is the foundation for why this happened.
Were they in Minidoka?
The family went to Minidoka. They also went to Tule Lake, and they wind up in Hart Mountain, Wyoming. Okay, and sorry. I'm still trying to figure out, because the records that I've seen thus far are ambiguous, whether Toll went to Hart Mountain with them for a while, or whether he was already in Pullman and outside of that zone. I suspect he went to Hart Mountain. He did come to the Washington State College in 1942. We have the transcript for that. And so we can prove he was here as of September of 42. At that point, Washington State, with other colleges, was accepting small numbers of Nisei college students as the hysteria was dying down, and so, well, let's give them a chance of an education in small numbers. You don't want them concentrated anywhere, right? So he studied business administration for a year. He worked in the college greenhouse because his father had a dream that the two older brothers would help set up a horticultural business. Toll goes into the U.S. Army in 1943, January 43. At this point, the Army had made the decision, well, it's okay, we need manpower, we can form all Japanese American units. The officers are white, but we'll have all Japanese Americans. He goes into the 442nd Infantry Regimental Combat Team, which is a small unit. It's about 3,000 some men. I think he went in originally as a medic, although he won, but again, I need to research that further. And the 442nd served in Italy and then in France in 1944. Nice. In October of 44, they were thrown in. At this point, the Americans were on the Franco-German border. They were in an extremely difficult terrain, the Vosges Mountains in France, Vosges. It was cold, it was foggy, it was heavily forested. The Germans would explode shells in the trees on purpose so the trees would shatter. And so that's like extra shrapnel coming down. And they were sent in there to rescue a smaller unit, the so-called Lost Battalion, which is Texas National Guard, that had been federalized. So to save 200 men, they throw in the 442nd. The 442nd had a total of 800 casualties in 2 weeks and 400 over about 4 or 5 days to try and fight their way through the Germans. During the climactic battle, which is literally clawing their way uphill and fighting hand to hand to break through, Toll was killed somewhere in that melee. He had turned 21 years old 3 weeks before. So in that sense, he's prototypical. So he's both very atypical, he's Nisei. His case raises huge questions about what was he thinking, serving the country while the United States, while his family was behind barbed wire. It's a very difficult and challenging question. His family has created a beautiful memorial garden, a Japanese garden, which to this day you can visit in Highline. It's just off of SeaTac in his honor. And Seattle Times has run several nice articles about that. For time reasons, I won't show a video about that, but I'm happy to reference that to you. So to finish up, if you haven't been to the Veterans Memorial recently, so I've already given my thanks to the History Department, the libraries, and Toll plays a huge role in this because for a little while last year, Dean Trevor Bond from the libraries and I were pursuing the idea of getting an honor degree for Toll because there was some interest in upper administration to give a special degree for students who had been incarcerated. For various reasons, we pivoted instead to decide to give certificates of academic achievement to all the families, which seemed to be a much, a broader and fairer policy. But it was Toll's case that inspired Dean Bond and myself to first contact upper administration, which led to upper administration deciding we're going to give certificates of achievement to the families, and we're going to fund you to finish this project. So in a sense, to be able to talk to you today with a degree of certainty that, yes, we're done with this project, as opposed to, well, we're still working on it, is due to Toll Segi. So I always want to give him his due credit. Just this past summer, this is the last thing I'll say, just this past summer, if you look at these plaques, they're nice and shiny. Because they are nice and shiny.
They got cleaned.
They're brand new. They didn't just get, these are new plaques.
Oh.
The university recast the plaques. In the course of our research, we found names that were not on the original plaques. They've been missed. We found misspellings. And we tried to fix everything up to be as accurate as possible. And we put them in alphabetical order because no one could figure out the reasoning behind the names before. We just we couldn't crack the code. They're now in simple alphabetical order. So if you wanted to find someone, you can find them. And so I think that I don't know if the university had this on where this wasn't their priority list before, but I like to think that Fallen Cougars helped bump it up the list a little bit. So next time you go to the Veterans Memorial, you see some really nice looking physical plaques. And I think it's just after 11. I think I'll stop here. I don't know your practice, Larry, if you guys are going to hustle out. Or
No.
I have to go to a meeting.
Yeah,
Can I make a comment though? This is fantastic. It's bringing life to that monument to fallen Cougars. There was an event here on May 13th, 1995, when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Shashkavili, came and gave the commencement address. And his son was a student here. And he had served before as the commander of Fort Lewis. So he loved Cougars. And we needed a commencement address that year, and Sam Smith couldn't come up with anybody. And my wife was working with his son as an advisor. And she said, would your dad consider coming out and giving the talk? And he came.
Wow.
With all the black boxes and everything that happens with somebody like that. And then he said, I want to do one thing, the conditions. I want to confer the commissions on all the ROTC officers.
Yeah.
And he did that. And he shook everybody's hand. And the families that were up there, everybody stood. It was like an incredible moment at WSU. I would love to know what happened to those people who were commissioned on 1995 and how many of them ended up going to harm's way and losing their lives. I think that'd be another wonderful project.
It would be. The quick way to go at this week, the memorial, the Veterans Memorial, many of you know, also has plaques, fortunately, but far fewer names, but for the global war on terror. And it includes both Gulf Wars. There's a few names there, and some of them maybe some of these graduates.
That class. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Nick.
Any questions from people on Zoom? All good. Questions? So, one thought that I have is, I think you should start just to address it, but the obvious thing is to continue this somehow to include, Korean, Vietnam vets and beyond. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I promised my wife that next summer is off. I've made that firm commitment, but after that,
possibility exists.
The possibility exists. We have the war records for World War I. To my mind, it would make sense to do a World War I companion
going backwards
to get both world wars. And this is not, I'm sure there would be other researchers. If I'm not doing it, there would be other researchers who'd be both interested and quite capable of doing whatever wars we haven't covered. But yeah, I would love at some point to see blanket coverage here.
Of a continuing project. It seems like such a natural, the way you involve students, both graduate and undergraduate students. And it's the information's there. I mean, it seems, reasonably, I mean, you have something to start with.
Yes. Yeah, there will always be graduate students who will jump at this because graduate students by nature love to do the research. And there's always going to be a minority of undergrads who, even if they don't understand what it is at the start, they will jump at the opportunity to get out of the box of exams and essays, and book reviews and actually do quote unquote real history. As I said, I'm surprised that it's not more.
Yeah.
But I think it does show that a lot of the students sort of just cling to the familiar. I can get an A in an exam, but there will always be students interested in doing this.
Yes. A few years ago, I read Bert Harrison's book on the history of KWSU, and I remember speaking, since we were talking about World War I. I remember him talking about that because one of the things that happened in World War I is that WSU was a Signal Corps training place because there was a very early wireless communication program. And I think it was, I'm trying to remember that, not Homer Dana, it was Carpenter, I think it was H.V. Carpenter was the person that did it. But apparently at one point, because it was a training ground, for a student to cross WSU, the campus of WSU had to have permission from the commandant. That's what I remember. Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't done WSC in World War I, so I can imagine.
There were some fairly
possibly,
interesting
perhaps.
stories about that in Bert Harrison's book.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping I remember right. But
Yeah, right. First greeting from Teresa Jordan, who one of his colleagues in history who's now retired. I just had a partially personal reaction in terms of your opening photograph. I'll do it an initial. That wasn't a cloth coat. That clearly, if you look at one of my responses to it was, in fact, that's a fairly well-off couple.
Oh, this one.
Oh, this is the very opening one, but something more relevant to that.
She is wearing in fact, some of the women are wearing, two of the women at least are wearing very nice fur.
But I'm born in Connecticut. My father is in war industry in that period. His sister was in either Wax or Waves. And my question is, anyone at WSU, I see no women here, and I try to search, but
we have two women. I think two. One was a faculty member. She was in trying to remember, some form of communications, and she joined one of the auxiliaries, but she died of illness. That still counts. And we had one more woman. We don't have any African Americans, since we're going on on issue of, it's a very white male war. Seki is the only Nisei. We don't have any African Americans, and 2 or 3 women in there. There was quite a presence of women who joined Wax and Waves on the WSC campus, because I didn't go into this for time reasons today, but what President Holland did in part as an administrative move to keep enrollment up and keep funding, but also as a patriotic action, was he opened up Washington State College to various military training programs. So we had the Army Specialized Training Program, which was giving technical training to enlisted soldiers and junior officers, enlisted soldiers and non-commissioned officers before they would go serve. And then we had the women's branches, Wax and Waves, and we have photographs of them training. And they were quite a substantial part. I haven't done the numbers, but they were quite a substantial part of the student body here. So although technically they were the soldiers also doing some university studying, they actually became a dominant part of university culture from 42, 43, and early 44. The Army needed manpower. I'll finish the story since I started. The Army needed manpower in 1944. And so the Army abruptly pulled the plug on the ASTP, on the Specialized Training Program, and they were just sent in as infantrymen. So, kind of big Army doing its thing. You want to have these technically adept soldiers. No, you're going to carry a rifle and go in. And many of them, there's a small plaque on the memorial to 250 some who were sent over as a group into an armored, I think the 11th Armored Division. They arrived in time to fight in the Battle of the Bulge. And many of them died. They were inexperienced. They were thrown in basically to fill up space, and they got hit by the German offensive there. So that's a bit off of your initial question.
No, it really is on top of it. Just
yeah.
The aunt obviously survived. I guess the other kind of question was simply when you were having your student researchers doing this, one notices, I notice a lot of just essentially tensions over fiancés, over girlfriends, over women on the home front. Did any of the students put together anything in terms of a war largely fought by by men, by white males serviced in other ways, but I'm just curious about that.
There are some really sad cases. I mean, many of them left behind recently married wives and very young children, some of whom were born after they were killed. So that's always.
My wife's Canadian, and that was her exact situation.
We have a few cases where when the soldier dies, the wife, it's hard to tell sometimes, but the wife disappears from the story. In other words, there's a separation between the soldier's family and her. If you dig far enough, I'm sure you could figure out what the source of the tension was. But we have some cases where the wife just vanishes or doesn't communicate, or remarries quickly afterwards, which is legitimate and okay. But it's not always a case of a family, with a death. It's not always that everyone bands together and comforts each other. Sometimes there is a very quick split, which you can speculate. We don't know. They're dealing with death, with wartime deaths. The wartime deaths sometimes bring up. There's such different ways in which families process this. So we've had some families, when we've been able to track down families, they're delighted to talk, oh, thank you for doing this project. Let me tell you as much as I can about so-and-so. And there's others where we track down the family and they deflect, or they don't answer, or they don't, even after it's clear that we've established contact, it's not a wrong number or a wrong email. They just say, I've not, it's not part of our lives anymore, or we don't. It's not just that we don't know. It seems to be kind of more an act of avoidance. And so who knows, what's going on there. And there are cases, not directly with fallen Cougars, but I've been contacted by some people trying to find out, as the word's gotten, to find out about their particular family, where that knowledge is actually denied to them. So, these are people who, if there's a family split, then they don't tell children about whoever it was who died in World War II, because that's somehow off limits and it's a cause of family tension. So there's all sorts of weird dynamics going on with this. We have been able to help at least one person make a spectacular rediscovery of his past, and of his great uncle, whoever died in Okinawa, and he made a pilgrimage out there. So people. My point being that 75 to 80 years later, people are still working to find closure on this. Sometimes just because they want to know more, but sometimes they find out information has been withheld, and they really feel like it's a big loss in their lives. Thanks.
Ray, I must say this was a really excellent presentation. I've been sitting here reflecting on this particular photograph. It's 1943. My three uncles have been in the war for 2 years now, and my father-in-law is just going in, and it could have been him. He was actually left from Penn Station in the East Coast. What I think is very moving about this is that it humanizes the war. And what I am concerned about as I listen to this presentation is, I was just also reading earlier this morning an article about where AI is going. And one of the more nefarious things about AI apparently is that we can potentially create devices that'll fight these battles for us. And I think that what you're uncovering here is one of the greatest reasons and rationale for avoiding war in the first place. And yet, as a society, we seem to be moving to wanting to dehumanize it and allow machines to just kill us off randomly. Just an observation. Maybe I'm overreacting to what I'm reading, but all these stories that my family has told me about my relatives did not pass in the war, and so we were fortunate in that regard. But this was very moving, and brought back a lot of memories, quite frankly. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
One of my uncles, by the way, was at Pearl on the 7th. And he avoided death because it was his day off.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. Anything else from Zoom?
No, but I thank you very much. This has been just a most interesting presentation.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ray.
Thanks,
we really
Larry.
appreciate just taking the time and doing this great work. Appreciate
for
it.
the opportunity.
Just in the way of announcement, our next meeting will be after Thanksgiving, December 2, I think it is. That's the first Tuesday in December.
Yes.
And John McCoy will be coming to speak. And then we have our, probably 2 weeks after that, we'll have our annual gathering for the holiday. So stay tuned to the email for those announcements. And thanks for coming for this morning. Thank you.